turn? Why don't you attach special importance to this fact because a president of a sovereign state has been killed? There is another subject, interference of the United States in the domestic affairs of Nicaragua. We'd like to comment in detail on the developments in this country as we approach its national election, which is to take place on the 7th of November. There is a growing wave of external pressure on the legitimate government of President Daniel Ortega. This pressure has little to do with the promotion of free democratic voting as was announced by its sponsors. In fact, it translates into a barbaric fight with an obvious goal to oust the Sandinistas by destabilizing the country. It is a traditional scenario for our Western counterparts. We also note that the ongoing brazen interference in the domestic affairs of Nicaragua, including the issues of its financing, are clearly written in the legislative framework of the United States. Back in 2018, the then American president took a decision. He adopted an executive decree announcing the situation in this Central American country, nothing less than an extraordinary threat to the U.S. national security and foreign policy. In December 2018, the United States adopted the Nicaragua Investment Conditionality Act in accordance with this instrument. The Americans blocked Nicaraguan financing from international banks and financial institutions such as IMF, World Bank, and others. They have introduced visa and other restrictions against Nicaraguan officials, terminated the temporary protected status for its migrants. This reign of economic restrictions started shrinking amidst the pandemic. Cynicism, really. The White House abruptly stopped the financial assistance to Nicaragua for social development and exclude the country from the list of countries receiving vaccines as humanitarian assistance. There are concerted efforts to remove Managua from regional free trade agreements. We are talking about the Central America Free Trade Agreement, the Dominican Republic Central America Free Trade Agreement. The same agreements include the European Union Central American Association Agreement, and there are also attempts to stop the participation of Managua in the Organization of American States. At the same time, they are concentrating efforts written in this same American laws, the NICA Act, to involve control NGOs in anti-government efforts. These things are really written down in the legislative acts of the United States of America. An immediate engagement with the opponents of the regime is being coordinated in Managua personally by the U.S. ambassador. He regularly holds instruction meetings with them. This is something we have seen with many other countries. According to experts, the USAID and other American, the so-called humanitarian organizations invested over $1 billion in the Nicaraguan opposition, not for social assistance, not for humanitarian assistance, not to fight the COVID pandemic. Instead, they're investing in the opposition forces of this state. While ignoring the principle of separation of powers, they are causing a historical hype around this, around judicial procedures regarding individual oppositionists, whereas any steps from legal authorities to curb foreign interference are being described by the Western mainstream no other than the oppression of freedom. We're talking about legislative measures to protect the sovereignty, mirroring U.S. own restrictions, really. For instance, as a part of the Foreign Agents Registration Act adopted back in 1938, we are well aware of this law. In the context of these concerns, we are surprised that mass beating-ups and even killings of protesters in other countries, including in Latin America, are not only silenced by Washington. In fact, they are justifying these actions. The global pandemic and the severe socioeconomic crisis it brought to many regions, including Latin America, showed that today the main line of protection of democracy and human rights is in many ways within the state manageability concept. All that is done by the collective West regarding Nicaragua runs counter, whereas the freedom of choice is replaced by the adjustment of the election process to a pre-programmed outcome meeting the interests of the outside political engineering. We categorically reject the attempts to interfere in the domestic affairs of Nicaragua from the outside. We are positive that the Nicaraguans themselves can determine without foreign interference their future. We wish to the government of this country peace and prosperity, as well as to the Nicaraguan people with whom we have strong bonds of friendship and strategic partnership. We will continue following developments in